With us today is Simon Sinek. We're really lucky. We're both in New York. We're both on the Upper West Side, so we decided to do this one as one of our live podcasts. Simon, I love your bio, right? The first line of Simon's bio is an unshakable optimist who believes in a bright future and our ability to build it together. And I think everything that you do follows that why, in a sense, like follows that purpose that you have. And Simon's publicized and popularized this idea of knowing your why and finding your why in a 2009 TED Talk that got millions and millions of views. How many views? 40 million views, subtitled in 47 languages. He's written most recently the book, The Infinite Game, which I really loved, and we're going to talk about some today. And I'm very happy to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Bregman Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's actually start. Let's not start at the infinite game. Let's start at what brought you, the why, and what is your why became this seminal turning point in both your career and also in the way that a lot of people think about the work that they do. What brought you to that idea?
Pain. It wasn't supposed to be what it became. It was. It came at a time in my life where I had lost my passion for my own work.
What was your work at the time?
I had a strategic marketing consultancy, and we did good work. And I was living the American dream. I owned my own little business.
Right.
We had great clients.
And you had partners with you,
a couple
and
employees,
employees, yeah.
And but I fell out of love, and I didn't want to wake up and do it again.
Right.
People give stupid advice. Do what you love. Well, I'm doing the same thing. I don't love it anymore. Now what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Find your bliss. Thank you.
Your bliss changes because you change.
Well, I mean,
was it your bliss at the beginning?
Who knows? But the point is, it's not actionable advice.
Right.
Only do work you're passionate for. It's
right.
not. It's true. It's just not helpful.
Right.
And so it was a kind of dark period, and because I was embarrassed because things were superficially good.
Did you hate it? Were you just out of love with it, but you kind of enjoyed it? What was your experience of it? How bad was it?
It was dark. I mean,
it was dark.
So
you really did not.
I really
like
didn't want to do it, and
right.
I felt like I was trapped and had no options, and it wasn't. And I was lying, hiding, and faking every day. All of my energy went into pretending that I was happier, more successful, and more in control than I felt.
Right.
And a dear friend came to me and said, "I'm worried about you," and it gave me a safe space to come clean.
And what did your friend notice that he or she was worried about? How did they know to say, "I'm worried about you"?
What makes a good friend a good friend? They notice.
Right.
And they notice what everybody else that I was able to fake, So
so many people, by the way, in the work that we do, I think, are in that place where they are pretending to be more successful than they are, or pretending to putting on that good face.
I mean, for many reasons. Some it's because they're going through what I went through,
right.
And some
it's a tactical strategy.
They falsely believe that by pretending they're more successful, it makes them more in demand.
Yeah, right.
It's like anybody that has Peter Bregman Consulting International. Usually, if it's international, it means it's probably out of your basement.
Right. Global is different.
Global is different.
Means right.
Big corporations are global,
right.
but individuals
international,
not so much. And I was very grateful because it gave me the safe space, and all of that energy that went into lying, hiding, and faking went
right.
into finding a solution. And the solution I found was an idea that I'd been tinkering with called the why, but it was only designed to help companies understand how to better market themselves, how to better talk about themselves.
Right.
And I started to learn about the biology of human decision-making and recognize that this idea that I had about marketing and the biology of human decision-making, the reason it worked in marketing is because it was real. It
right.
wasn't my opinion.
Right.
It was actually grounded in something. And so I recognized that I knew what I did and I knew how I did it, but I didn't know why. So I became obsessed. I was able to figure out my why, ask somebody for help to do that. We don't have objectivity about ourselves.
Right.
And it restored my passion to levels I'd really never experienced before. Shared it with my friends. My friends started making crazy life changes themselves. And they invited me to their homes to share it with their friends. And I would literally stand in someone's living room in New York City and talk about this thing called the why and help people find their why for $100 on the side. And
in some ways, it's not totally different than strategy work with an organization, because an organization's strategy work should come out of their why, right?
Should.
Right.
is the operative word
Right,
there.
but that wasn't the way you were doing strategy work, or most people
No,
do
it was the way I was
work.
doing strategy work. I just didn't understand what was so profound was understanding the biological component and recognizing that the reason good marketing or good communications worked was because it literally tapped into how people make decisions and how people think and feel. And so it has a very personal, and if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. I mean, organization, I love it when people, IBM today announced, IBM didn't announce anything. Somebody made a decision and told the PR department to whip something up. Somebody approved it, and today IBM announced. It's human beings.
Right.
It's always human beings.
Right.
We put these sort of facades on human beings, and they become these corporations that announce
things. In fact, I was thinking about this recently. That I was just reading yet another statement by a senior leader saying our employees are our most important asset. And my question was, who's saying this that's not also an employee? Right, our employees are like, who's putting this out?
Well, and who's saying it, and are you actually making
almost
decisions?
Never.
That's the thing that drives me nuts, which is I've never met a CEO who doesn't believe their people are important. The question is, where on the list are they?
Right.
Number one, growth. Number two, shareholder value. Number three, our customer. Number four, our employees. See, I told you, our people are really important. There they are,
and actually,
right on the list.
Even if they're the top of the list, the real question of what our values are is the choices that we make when our values are in contradiction with each other, right? Or in conflict, right?
Of course.
And so, are people really? Who did that was, and I cannot remember his name. You might know his name. The CEO of Alcoa. Mm-hmm. When I love the story of when he came in and it was turnaround, and he said, you may know the story better than I do, but he came in and he said, the only thing I'm concerned about is employee safety, and people, the financial analysts who were in the room couldn't get out of the room fast enough to put a sell order on the stock. 3 years later, it was worth, multiples of what it was beforehand.
Of course. But remember, the whole financial analyst community, their entire bonus structure is based on the short term. Right. Long-term investors don't pay any attention to what Citicorp analysts think. They have their own analysts. Warren Buffett has his own analysts. The entire industry, CNBC, all of it is for the short game. Right. And so we shouldn't be taking advice from people who literally aren't interested in the success of our own organizations.
Let me ask you about the moment when you make this decision. Because this is, I think, a moment that is very scary for a lot of people, and it's full of sort of promise but also doubt. This moment when you decide, okay, I'm going to leave this thing that I'm faking, that doesn't feel me, but it's successful, right? I'm doing well by it. It could continue to be successful. I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to do this thing that I'm making $100 a session on, right? Which I'm assuming was not as much as you were making in your strategy consulting firm, right? So
why I was doing it on the side.
Right. So you're doing this thing on the side, and you make this decision, and it might have been an easy decision because you got 40 million views on this.
This was years before that.
So
this was years. Everybody thinks I showed up with the TED Talk in a book.
Right.
I was giving that talk for 3 years before the TED Talk.
So tell me what was going on for you emotionally too, because that's a really hard choice to make, to go, I'm going to leave this that I know is profitable and doesn't fit in order for this, which I'm passionate about and I'm connected to and makes me feel alive, but I'm making $100.
It was even worse than that, which is closed the company, got out of my lease. I had a business lease, I had an office, got out of my lease and started from scratch. And a lot of my friends were very worried about me. They thought I went out of business.
The same friends who were like, I'm worried about you beforehand, are like, now I'm really worried about you.
No, actually different friends. It was actually the easiest decision I've ever made, because when you have focus and passion for something, and it seems like a gut-wrenching decision if you can't see what I can see.
Right.
But that's what vision is.
Right.
When you can see something with so much clarity, and the path, it's hard work, but you can see a path. It may not be the path.
Right.
But you can see a path. It was actually a really surprisingly simple decision.
A path to, because I think this is an important piece. You see a path to.
Well, so here's the analogy. You're married.
Right.
You're spending time with a human being, and at some point in that relationship, it becomes absolutely obvious to both of you that this is going to be forever.
Right.
And you make a decision to legally unite your relationship, where it comes with a whole host of legal requirements.
Right.
When you get married. But when people say, you really want to do this? I mean, and you go, of course. It's the simplest decision we ever made. It's just it's a formality. Like, we love each other. Of course we want to do this. It's the same thing. You know, and the vision you have is a life together and a family and vacations together and partnership, and it's not a crystal clear, but you can see it hazily in the future.
Right.
It's the same thing. Like, I think anyone that has any kind of vision of the future for their life, whether it's professional or personal, the clearer that is, and it's not a sit down decision. You don't sit down and go, well, this person makes a good wife because X, Y, and Z.
I mean, you're talking to somebody who I knew Eleanor, my wife, 11 years before we got married.
Yeah.
We did
What took you so
5
long?
years of counseling to like really, so I'm not really like let's just jump and do this thing after knowing each other for a couple of years. But
you did it.
But we did it, right? Yeah. Exactly.
It's okay.
And like we couldn't have imagined actually the road that we've been on for the past 20 years.
You think I imagined anything that I'm doing right now?
Right.
Nothing.
No, but you know
Zero.
that this is where I want to spend my time.
What I knew was I believed in this thing enough that I wanted other people to experience what I experienced.
Right.
You know, we treat loving our work like a luxury.
Right.
You go out with a bunch of your friends and somebody at the table says, I love my job, and everybody else goes, oh my God, you're so lucky. Like they won something.
Right.
And because I was able to turn around not loving my work into loving my work.
Right.
And it wasn't the work. It's not like I got a new job at a different company selling a different thing and I'm like, oh my God, I love this.
Right.
It was the same thing.
I love these people. I hated those people.
Exactly.
Right.
Because it was the same thing, I came to the conclusion that this thing called loving work was a right and not a privilege.
Right.
And it's not just for the lucky few who get to say, I love my work. Everyone gets to say it. And because I had figured out how I could do it for myself, I wanted other people to have that same experience.
Right.
Because it was so much better to wake up in the morning inspired to go to work than dreading going to work.
Right.
And so, though I didn't know how I was going to get there, I knew that I wanted more people to have this experience.
Right.
And so for me, the fun part, this is the entrepreneurial journey,
Right.
which is, I'll figure it out,
Right.
Like, and I started off doing consulting. I don't really do any consulting anymore. That wasn't the path. And I've refined and figured out a model, and I've made certain decisions that are right for me, but, right for the movement.
Right.
So I didn't know the details. I just knew a sense of destination.
Right.
And
you think of it as a movement. It's a movement. It's your.
Oh, it's a movement.
Yeah.
We don't talk about, when we make decisions in the company, we don't say, is this right for the company? We say, is this right for the movement?
Right.
It's how we make decisions.
Right.
We think of ourselves as messengers, carrying a powerful message. We try and provide tools to help advance that message and help people grasp that message. Mm-hmm. But, make no mistake of it, is a movement. And we want to move people from here to there.
Right, so you want to move them from?
We want to create a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe at work, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. Right. That could mean someone who works in a corporation. It could be an entrepreneur. It could be someone who's a home builder. Right. Why shouldn't every person wake up in the morning inspired to raise their family, feel safe in doing so from the other family members, and go to bed at night fulfilled? I mean, that is a right and not a privilege.
Right. Are there moments even in this journey that is exciting and inspiring to you where you feel like, you know what, today I'm not totally inspired?
So this is what people confuse about joy and happiness. Mm-hmm. Happiness is fleeting. Winning a client, happy. Right. Hitting a financial goal, happy. Right. But that goes away. Right. Joy is like love. Joy is an ongoing thing. Right. And you love your kids every day. You don't like your kids every day. Right? You can love your work every day, but you don't have to like it every day. Right. There are plenty of days I do not like. Right. But I still love it. And you have this sense, I'm in the right place, doing the right thing with the right people. Yeah, and I make mistakes, and I correct, and sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it's certain, and sometimes it's uncertain. I mean, it's the difference is I make these things with and this is what the why does for anybody, which is it helps you make these decisions while looking up rather than looking down. Right. I see the forest for the trees always, and I'm not navigating based on the rocks and the stumps in front of me. Did you have any moments as you were building this where you felt like
where you were worried this might not work? I mean, right now you're very successful. You've written a bunch of books. They're bestsellers. You know, you are leading a movement, and there's a lot of people joining you and working on this, and it's inspiring. Were there moments on this where you had that doubt? Or,
Of course.
And how do you keep yourself going in those moments?
I have people who believe in me, and people who believe in that this is the right work to do.
Right.
And, you know, courage is not internal fortitude.
Right.
Courage is fear enacting anyway.
Right.
It's not the absence of fear. And courage doesn't come from digging down deep. Courage comes from somebody who says to you, I got your back.
Right.
I believe in you.
Right.
You got to do this. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
and then we act.
Right.
But without another human being, no single human being can do this thing called life or career alone. It's madness.
Really powerful, and I think people forget that a lot because it's like,
we're social animals.
I've got this thing. I'm going to make it happen despite everybody, and it's not despite everybody.
There's not
it's
a single.
everybody.
There's not a single successful, inspired, and happy person on the planet who did it alone. Zero.
So I know leaders who have the same kind of inspired mission that you do, but they also have egos that make it very difficult to bring in other people and empower them and say, go run with this. Like, what I care about more is the mission than my own success. I'm not threatened at all by you. And that, like, what do you say to somebody like, do you bother with somebody like that? And if you do, what do you say to them to help them sort of soften the part of them that needs to be the center of it and brings in the inspiration as the center of it?
I simply ask them if they can pass the school bus test.
What's the school bus test?
If you get hit by a school bus, what happens to the organization? Will the people continue without you? Or will they all be like, that sucks, and they'll go find jobs somewhere else?
So let me ask you a question about that.
And most people fail the school bus test.
So
most people with those kinds of command and control instincts,
right.
If you present it like that, they know that.
So here's a question that I've really been struggling with myself. So Alan Mulally, right? CEO of Boeing, CEO of Ford, good guy. I know him. He's good. Like both.
He's one of the good ones.
He's one of the good ones, right? So he turns around Boeing, right? He turns around Ford. He turns around Ford with all of the original players who were failing
all the
beforehand.
All the brokenness.
All the brokenness. He turned it around, right? So on the one hand, you look at that and you say, amazing leadership.
Sure.
Like, here's someone who stepped in as a leader, but failed the school bus test, right? Because when he left, Ford fell off. And when he left Boeing, Boeing fell off. So his leadership was essential to keeping the bus going.
I blame the board.
So say more about that.
I think boards get off easy. They hire and fire CEOs, but they also create incentive structures for those CEOs.
Right.
And you and I both know that what's going on with Boeing right now, that wasn't that CEO acting alone.
Right. Absolutely.
That board set a set of targets for him.
Right. Same thing with Volkswagen and
all
the
of
emission
them. That
scandal.
board set a set of targets for him based on the price of the equity. And they drove him very, very hard. And he succumbed to the pressures of the short-term analyst community.
Right.
Every CEO, every C-level executive of every public company on the planet, behind closed doors, knows that Wall Street is a joke.
Right.
Like, they all talk about it, not out loud,
right.
but behind the closed doors,
right.
Oh my God, it's just, everybody knows it. They know that they're forced to make decisions that are bad for their company.
Right.
I mean, if a company announces mass layoffs, the stock price goes up, and if they announce that they're reinvesting in R&D, the stock price goes down. Like, that's screwed up.
It's very screwed up.
You know? And they all know it. They all roll their eyes.
Right.
They all know the analyst community cares nothing about their businesses and only about themselves.
Right.
And yet they play the game.
Right.
And so I blame the board for not supporting or putting in a CEO with vision and the willingness to stand up to the analyst community. And there's a lot of blame to go around. The problem is no one will go to jail. There's real negligence here. People died.
Right.
People died. 2 plane loads worth of human beings died because the company
was more worried about fast growth and short-term profits.
Was more worried about fast growth and cut corners and produced an aircraft that shouldn't be in the sky and produced, instead of making an aircraft that should be in the sky, they produced a safety mechanism to help it stay in the sky with computers, and then wouldn't teach everybody how to use that safety mechanism unless you paid to learn it, which of course the smaller airlines and developing nations aren't going to do.
Right.
I mean, like, on what planet is this highly ethical behavior?
Right.
In Wall Street land, that's when it's, you know.
The theme
I think the board bears some responsibility.
Common theme.
I think people need to go to jail.
Right. And there's
including that CEO. He got a $65 million, sorry, this didn't work out, you know?
Right. This theme that is also a part of human nature, right? Like, it's a part of human nature to be inspired and to, and it's a part of human nature to, like, greed and like this dark side, right?
Sure, absolutely.
It's like, it's all part of human nature.
It's all the package. It's all the whole package.
And so what have you, in your path of inspiring people and getting them to prioritize, to bias towards the inspiring, passionate part of their nature versus the sort of greed, short-termness of it. Anything that you've learned that helps people, you know, like I assume that there's people watching here and listening who feel the tug of both of those things and want to move in this direction of kind of inspiring and long-term and yet act in ways that don't always reflect that. What can you say to them, or how can you help people, you know, prioritize this one over the other?
So, you have to have a sense of where you come from. You need to know why you do what you do. You know, you need to know where you come from. You need to know the foundation, the inspirational underpinnings.
Right.
You need to have a sense of just cause, a sense of vision of where you're going to.
Right.
You need to know that your work is, all the work that we do should be to advance something bigger than ourselves. And you need to ensure that the relationships you build around you are trusted and trusting.
Right.
That we are trusted and we are trusting.
Right.
And this sort of infinite mindset is an insurance policy against the kind of ethical fading you're talking about.
Right.
A finite mindset, which is waking up every day to win, be number one, be the best, and drive short-term results, increases the likelihood that ethics fail. So we're all susceptible, and even good companies and good people have individual ethical lapses.
Right.
But this doesn't necessarily translate into ethical fading, which is systemic, where an entire company acts unethically.
Right.
You know, Wells Fargo,
right.
you know, opening 3.5 million fake bank accounts to meet their
right.
sales goals.
It's what's sad and shameful is there's plenty of examples.
Yeah, of course,
right?
there's plenty of examples. They don't all end up in scandal,
right?
But it's even
systemic.
But even without the scandals, it's uncomfortably common,
right?
And we say the same things to rationalize our unethical behavior.
Everybody's doing it.
Everybody's doing it. I got to put food on the table.
Right.
You know, I got mouths to feed. That's what my boss wants. Or my personal favorite one is it's the industry standard.
Right.
I'm like,
right.
well,
right.
So what?
Right.
You know,
right.
It's the system, Simon.
Right.
It's the industry standard.
So tell us what the infinite game is.
So the infinite game is a philosophy that was first put forward by a wonderful human being named James Carse in the 1980s that proposes that there are these two kinds of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective.
Monopoly.
Baseball, football, Monopoly, right? There's a beginning, middle, and end, and if there's a winner, there has to be a loser.
Right.
And then you have infinite games.
Although soccer these days, in my kids' things, everybody's a winner.
Yeah, that's not true. That's just not true. And then you have infinite games, which are defined as known and unknown players, which means anybody can join at any time.
Right.
You have changeable rules, which means you can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game and to stay in the game as long as possible. You play for the good of the game.
Right.
So we are players in infinite games every day of our lives, games that have no finish lines.
Right.
Like there's no such thing as winning career. Like no one's declared the winner of careers.
Right.
You know, there's no such thing as being number one in your marriage.
Right.
You know, there's no such thing as winning global politics, and there's definitely no such thing as winning business.
Right.
But if you listen to too many leaders, they talk about being number one,
right.
being the best, and beating their competition. Based on what?
Right.
Based on what agreed upon metrics, objectives, or timeframes.
Right.
It's all made up. And so the problem is when we play with a finite mindset, play to win, in a game that has no finish line,
right.
there's a few very predictable and consistent outcomes. The decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. All the things that we said lead to ethical fading.
Right.
So this is what happens.
Right.
And so the more finite thinking, the more likelihood there is for not only unethical behavior, but the more likelihood that we create a culture in which people feel like a number rather than a person, feel disposable rather than valuable, don't feel they can trust their colleagues, don't feel like they can trust leadership, and don't feel like they have agency over their own work on a daily basis.
Right.
Unfortunately, this is what too many people feel every day. It's called stress.
Right.
It's called stress. That's what it is, right? And this is why we have work-life imbalance. No amount of yoga is going to fix that.
Right.
The imbalance we feel is that I feel safe at home, but I don't feel safe at work. And the way to fix that is by creating safe and purposeful cultures at work.
It feels, as I'm listening to you, like one of the key moves that we have to make in order to play the infinite game versus the finite game is we have to see our, it's not about us, it's about the game, the infinite game, or it's about the purpose.
It's not
of
about
what we're doing.
as us as individuals.
As individuals.
It's about us as a community.
Yeah. It's the us, like we are smaller than the ultimate us that we're talking
Correct.
about, right? And that's like the finite game is I'm going to win.
Yeah.
Right? The infinite game is we're talking ancestors and generations.
And you can tell the infinite players because the infinite players in business want to make business better. You play for the good of the game.
Right.
So you have companies like WD-40 or Container Store or Patagonia who are innovating new ways to make their businesses healthier and more successful, and they're sharing those ideas.
Right.
They, all of those CEOs are out giving speeches about how they do it.
Right.
Zappos, they share everything about how we treat our people and the systems we have, so that it's good for all business. It makes business healthier.
Right.
Finite-minded organizations, keep everything closed, thinking that it's a competitive advantage the way we treat our people, as opposed to good for the game.
Apple is a company that you talk about a lot in the book, and I can't think of a more secretive company.
They're secretive about their innovation. They're secretive about their process. They're secretive about they're famous for keeping sort of even people inside the company don't have access to certain rooms because But they're not secretive about their special sauce and their vision. They're very open about it. They're very public about saying, when we hire smart people and they tell us what great things they did in the past, we're not interested. We're interested about what you're gonna do, not what you've done. They're very open about the stuff that's good for the game of business.
Right.
And that's important.
Right. Although they're not really they're not trying to help Microsoft. They're not really trying. I mean, they're not.
I don't think they're out to hurt Microsoft.
Think.
I mean, in the old days, Microsoft, like IBM before them, was a great foil. Right. It was sort of Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, the dark side and the Force.
Right.
They played against each other. I think Microsoft was trying to beat Apple. Apple was trying to outdo itself. Right. And Microsoft was a great foil. Right. It's great for rallying the people to have a common enemy. Right. But that's fine. To have a worthy rival is important. Someone that pushes you to be a better version of yourself. But I don't think they actually cared whether Microsoft survived or died.
A little bit of a side note: is Adam Grant your worthy rival?
I don't know.
Because he's talked about the friendship that's developed.
Yeah.
And
now, Adam and I have a deep, loving respect for each other that used to be a competitive spirit.
Right.
And we had a cathartic experience together where we came clean about it.
Right.
And the nice thing is that energy has been turned into love.
Yeah, and I have to say for myself also, I had this, I felt that with you, and I felt that I've had these sort of people that I for myself I'm like, well, they're more successful than I am, and
based on what?
And and it's totally, I have to say it's like over the past, doing this podcast in part, but over the past 3 years or so has totally changed. And these people who I used to think of as competitors, I'm now literally doing work with. I mean, we're just collaborating, we're doing really interesting stuff. And it's so freeing and so much more interesting than
it's so much more fun.
And
it's a lot less stressful. You can if I wake up any day and pick a particular random metric, I can make myself feel bad about anything.
Right.
If I judge my entire career by TED views, I mean, there are other people who are moving ahead beyond me. I used to be number 2. Now I'm number 4. who cares? I mean,
Right.
like if that's all I obsessed about,
Right.
then I would think my career is failing.
Right.
You know, it depends where you're looking.
Right.
But at the other side, I can't just choose the metrics
Right.
that are comparatively bigger than other people, because then I'll think I have nothing to learn.
Right.
And that's equally as blind.
Well, and it's false.
And false.
Right? Yeah,
They're both equally as
They're
blind.
Right.
And what did Teddy Roosevelt say? Comparison is the death of joy.
Right.
But
isn't it a little hard not to?
of course, we're human.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
So what do you do in those moments when you start comparing?
Remind myself.
Right.
I remind myself I'm looking at a metric.
Right.
That I picked in this
Right.
moment, usually by accident.
Right.
Because I happen to be on that website, or
Right. Right.
And at the end of the day, to remind ourselves that, I mean, I can take you back to the early days, like when I was on a stage with some remarkable speakers.
Right.
I mean, some of the best in the world, and I was sharing a stage with them, and I remember feeling incredibly insecure and thinking that I had to give a better speech than them, and that I had to get a longer ovation than them,
Right.
and this is the pressure I put on myself. Now it's the complete opposite. Now I show up in complete awe that I can't believe I get to share my ideas with these incredible people that I
Right.
love and admire,
Right.
and how humbled I am.
Right.
And may we all get lots of
Right.
ovation, because it means we're all offering value to the world.
Right.
And it just is this is why I was so profoundly moved by Dr. Karsa's work, of this infinite game.
Right.
To understand the concept of the infinite game, very quickly you can change your mindset.
Right.
To just find more peace in the success and the journey that you're on yourself, rather than worrying about what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Because there is no winning this game, because there is no finish line. There is no.
Well, and also if you really care about what you're trying to produce, like I really care about a lot of the same stuff you care about.
Of course.
And so
That's why we get along.
And it's like how awesome that you're out there doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
And how nice of you to invite me on your podcast.
Right,
Like why wouldn't we help each other?
Yeah, and we're gonna have an impact, a grander impact
Let's hope.
than we would have otherwise.
Yeah.
And you have to trust. There's a leap of faith, a little bit, that you trust, that you say, like, this is gonna. I have a practice recently where as soon as I see myself competitive with someone, I realize it's because there's something about them that I'm like a little jealous of.
Of course.
Which means that there's something about them that I really like, right? And then I try to identify what idea it is, and then I try to popularize that idea through them. Like, let me tell you something this person has just said that really impacted
This
me.
is the idea of worthy rivalry that I talked about.
Yeah.
Our worthy rivals, their strengths reveal to us our weaknesses.
Right.
And we can either combine our powers and so that both those weaknesses are mitigated,
Right.
or we can work to improve.
Right.
And we take all that uncomfortable energy, instead of channeling it into competitive energy, we channel it into self-improvement energy.
Right.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Well, I have a live tour that we're experimenting with.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing our own events, because we came to the realization that we're out there spreading this message of companionship and cooperation and human sort of that human dynamic, and the kind of conferences that I spoke at, just a lot of people couldn't go. You couldn't go. They're either private events, or they're these ridiculous big ticket business events that just are prohibitive.
Right.
And so we decided to do our own tour where we could set the agenda. I could decide what I wanted to talk about. I didn't have anybody to tell me what they wanted me to talk about or what their theme was. And we could make it at a price point that was accessible to as many people as possible. So we're doing that, which I'm really excited about.
Well, and you must have had to develop an entire arm of the organization, because that's a very difficult business model to I'm just thinking the model of saying I'm going to go out to a place and really bring in a whole bunch of people to have this conversation. I think it's hard, yeah? Or not so much. It hasn't been so hard.
Just work with people who know how to do it.
Right.
We're not doing it ourselves.
Right.
We're partnered. We partner. Like, we have no clue how to do live events.
Right. That's
at that scale.
Right.
Like, we have no clue.
Right.
But turns out there were people who
people
built
who-
entire businesses
around
this stuff.
Right.
So I could try and reinvent the wheel and make a square thing that doesn't go very well.
Right.
Or I can find somebody who knows how to do this and be
Right.
like, but as long as we share values,
Right.
as long as we have common cause,
Right.
then I want to work with them. Like, I don't care if they're the best based on their own metrics.
Right.
I want to know
what they care about.
What they care about, and do we both have equal passion to do this together?
Right.
That they're inspired by my work and I'm inspired by theirs.
Right.
And turns out, when you find those people, it hums.
Right.
So we have some great partners that we're working with that are helping us do this. Yeah.
Which makes the whole thing more fun too, right?
Yeah,
because you're not alone.
And we don't have to learn. Somebody else's. We don't have to relearn a lesson that's already been learned.
Right. We have been talking with Simon Sinek. Simon's latest book is The Infinite Game. We didn't talk a ton about it. We talked about it in general, but there is so much more that we didn't talk about that is incredibly an infinite amount. But that's also very instructional, right? That kind of gives us a sense of like, how do we shift into play this?
Yeah.
What are the elements? How do we create an organization that plays this infinite game?
I mean, I was inspired by Dr. Karsa's perspective, but one of the opportunities was, well, okay, got it. Now what?
Right.
And so that's what I wrote. I said, okay, if this is a truth, if this is a fundamental truth that these two perspectives, these two games exist,
right, then
if we want to convert our businesses, the way we build our lives, our careers, away from a finite-minded perspective to an infinite one, how do we do that? And that's what I set out to try and share.
I think you did a great job. It's a great book. I really enjoyed reading it. I suggest that if you're listening to this podcast and you found this remotely interesting, that you go out and buy the book and read it and be part of this conversation and join Simon in one of these events and engage in these ideas that I really believe help us not only to be more effective, but better people, which is ultimately what this is about.
Ultimately what this is about, correct.
Simon,
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much.
Such a pleasure.
It's such a pleasure.
Yeah.